right, good to go.
All right, thanks for having me. This is the GMAT workshop. I'm Ben Resnick with GMAT Coach. And today we're going to cover a whole bunch of things related to the GMAT, the importance of it, the format, the scoring, question types, when to take it. My favorite part, of course, is how to maximize your score. That's what I think about all day. That's my passion. Not only just the nitty-gritty of the GMAT itself, but kind of the bigger picture things of how can we optimize our habits and structure our time. That plays a big part into it, especially when you're doing something where you don't necessarily have the accountability. That's something I help with too, but that's a huge part of it, is all those habits. So let's get right into it. Oh, one note actually is that all the slides and the links will be here at gmatcoach.com/resources. So first of all, why do people take the GMAT? It's to get an MBA, Master's in Business, and several reasons people do that. Skills and knowledge, of course. Networking is one of the biggest things. People probably more than anything say that that's one of the biggest benefits, is all the amazing classmates they meet. And then, of course, more career options, leadership positions, or a change of industry are common primary motives there. But I know everybody watching here is also a shrewd business student, and you also have another question on your mind, which is, show me the numbers. So the numbers matter. So it is a large investment. We're looking here, starting 12 years ago, it's almost doubled. So it's a huge increase at about $110,000, and this is for the top 100 programs by Financial Times. So it is a little steep. I mean, it definitely is. There's scholarships and in-state tuition that'll cut into that, and it varies a bit, but that's a lot, and it's a big decision. So the flip side of that is, if we look at starting salaries, an average of around 70, that's more than doubling up to 140 on average. And so people are taking a significant leap, and that's part of the reason the GMAT is so important. Those leaps will tend to be greater at the higher ranked schools, although it's not all about the money. There's all kinds of reasons and benefits for it, but it's important to understand all this things and weigh the pros and cons. A little bit more in the numbers. So this is pay scale data, and they're actually probably estimates because there's bonuses and stocks are not included. But if you look at a bachelor's to an MBA, that's like $500,000, and then MBA just in general to the top 50, that's like another $500,000. And then if you manage if you get into this top 10, that's like another $500,000 over a 20-year span. So just to get a sense of part of the reason why people are competing so hard. All right, and now let's look at the importance of GMAT on admission rates. So this is elite schools. This graph is for ranked 8 through 19 on GMAT Club, which is the #1 forum and for GMAT. If we look at a 650 or less, and 650 is actually a pretty good score. That's a 75th percentile. But at these top schools, that still only get you a 9% acceptance on average. And it's going to depend a lot depending on your background and work experience and all those other factors, but the GMAT's one of the biggest things. And then if you were able to leap up to a 700, a 90th percentile, which is what a lot of people are targeting that are for these competitive schools, or somewhere above 700, then you're more than doubling your chances up to 19%. And it may actually be more than that, because you're competing with people in a similar demographic. So if you look at within a given demographic, it's actually, the curve can be steeper. Like if you're sub 700 in the most competitive group, which is Indian engineers, it's like a 2% chance. It's pretty tough. So let's see. So the GMAT sections, there's 4 sections, and good news for everyone here. The quant and verbal, which are the most important sections, these 2 make up the 800 score. So that's what we were talking about on the previous slide. These are separate scores here. So the good news is that this is actually reduced by 23 minutes. These used to be both 75. So that's a nice thing. Could work to your benefit because fatigue is a factor. The number of questions that are actually graded don't change. It's just they got rid of some of the experimental questions. It used to be that a full quarter of the test was test questions that didn't count. And this makes more sense. So you also have this integrated reasoning. So this is your second priority. This is your first priority. And then this is a distant third, the writing assessment. This far and away counts for the most, the quant and verbal. And then within that, we'll get into it more. There's 2 different kinds of quant questions, 3 kinds of verbal questions. All right, so here's that total score we mentioned between 200 and 800 on the right here. And you have scores for verbal and quant between up to 51. So they combine these scores into the total score. If you increase by 1 point on verbal or quant, that's equal. Each point is worth about 8. So plus 1 here, on average, approximately, it rounds to the nearest 10, but it's around plus 8 for the total score. You see here, it's interesting that the verbal, the quant average score is much higher than the verbal, so the potential maximum above the average is much higher on the verbal. So there's kind of diminishing returns, like from a 60th percentile here to get up to the maximum, it's only 5 points. From the 60th percentile to the maximum here is actually 20 points, so that's pretty extreme. So there's a lot of room to improve on that verbal. Integrated reasoning is out of 8. It's approximately how many questions you get right out of 12. Not exactly, but so average of a 4, and then the essay average of 4.5. Now, for native speakers, this shouldn't be too much trouble to get in this, probably in this range, 5 to 6. It's going to be harder if you don't have as much experience or it's not a native language. It's going to take some more practice. But ideally, we'll spend the least amount of time on this essay here. And there's actually a template that I'll show you, give you an outline for how to structure it that makes it easier. All right, so section order choices. So this is really nice. Something that was introduced only about a year ago is it used to be you had to take this order, that's it. And now you have your choice of 3 orders. So this one I don't recommend. That's taking the essay first, the verbal at the end. Actually, prefer the reverse. Take the verbal first. You may be feeling a little fatigue after into the second section. And the price you pay on some fatigue at the end of quantitative is going to be a little bit less. So I like that one. It's a personal preference, though. If you went with this one and said, I want to do the quant first, that would be totally fine. But it's definitely nice to have those out of the way at the start. One other note is you do have an 8-minute break here. So 8 minutes in between. And you want to make sure you get back on time or you'll lose time. I did that once, and it's very stressful. Don't do that. I should know better. But it's kind of funny. I was chewing my carrots. Don't over-chew your carrots. Or just bring something that's easier to snack on. Some of these little details, it's funny. Like, you can overthink it, but at the same time, mess it up. So I've heard people stressing out because they left their phone on in the locker. There's a locker there, and they were worried about their phone ringing. I mean, these kind of things, it's just a shame. I mean, you can cancel your score, but you lose the $250 and you got to go back and do it again. So, yeah. So here we go. So computer adaptive test. So this is unique about the GMAT. It's on the computer. So you want to probably be doing your practice on the computer, I generally suggest. And the other thing is the difficulty level increases the better you do. So you get the first one right, the second one right. This is a little bit shrunk down, this graph, but your average difficulty, the better you do, it'll go up. As you do worse, you get questions wrong, the average difficulty goes down, and then it'll go back up as you get them right. So two people could miss the same number of questions and get vastly different scores because their average their difficulty level is higher, and it's all about where you end. So your score, if you get more right at the start, you'll have harder questions, and if you get the same amount right, you'll end up with a much higher score. Now, the other thing about this computer adaptive test is you only get one shot at each question. You can't go forward or backwards. So if you're stuck or confused, it's important to, well, a mistake people make is because of this, they say, oh, I only got one shot. I really want to get this right. I can get it. But you're under time pressure. You only got 2 minutes per question for quant, 1:48 on verbal. So making that, this GMAT is also testing decision making and time management, and so that executive function, they call it. When you don't know, you guess and you move on, and that's a big part of it. Ideally, the more practice you do, that'll become more fewer and far between. Oh, great question about the stopwatch. So the test, you can't bring anything pretty much at all other than in your locker. You can have your food, can't touch your phone, but there will be a timer in the top right that will tick down. So it starts, it'll just start at like the 65 minutes, and then it'll go down. Yeah. So you can plan in advance for benchmarks, like, so the quant, that was the verbal was 65 minutes. For the quant, you have 62 minutes. And then each question is going to be 2 minutes. So you can plan, okay, 5 questions in. I want to be at 52 minutes after 5. You can spend a little bit more at the start because you want to be accurate at the start to get those harder questions, but not too much more. And then to be on pace after 10 questions, 42, so et cetera. So that's a great question. All right, so one of the question type, three verbal question types is reading comprehension. So we've probably seen this on the SAT potentially, or another test in school. And what most people will do that can be a mistake is they read it and then they answer the questions based on memory. And then the level of detail these questions ask is such that the average person will get half of them wrong. Just remembering it isn't enough. So what I advise instead is think like a lawyer. You got to prove the answer. You read the question, and you find and prove support in the passage. One thing that can be really helpful is we have keywords in the question. It won't work 100%, but most of the time you can find the sentence with direct support. We have these 3 keywords that are highlighted. Now I want to note that it wouldn't be highlighted. I just highlighted this, but we got a match for these keywords in the first sentence. And so our answer is going to come here in the rest of this sentence. Prevent the opening of tribal lands to non-Indian settlement without tribal consent. And here, it would take a little more time to verify fully, but that matches. Without obtaining permission, outsiders matches up with the non-Indian settlement, and there you go. The process of elimination can also be useful. So as we read these other answers, we'll see that they don't work. You're not going to be able to write on the screen. It's not on paper. So what I advise is you make a little chart. You'll have a yellow pad there'll be a link on to buy it. You can actually buy the pad, the exact pad on Amazon that you use. So on your pad, you have A, B, C, D, E, and you just will cross off the ones as you go along on each question as you eliminate. Critical reasoning. So there's a whole bunch of slightly different question types on this, but the most common, about half of them, are strengthen and weaken an argument. So you have an argument, it has some premises and a conclusion. So like a main point and things to support it. And we have to either strengthen or weaken that argument. There's going to be some weakness in it. So the strengthen often is removing a weakness. It's another way to think about it. So first step on these, and of course there's a lot, would be a ton to cover on each of these sections, but we look at this is called the stem. We see what type of question it is. We see this word undermines. We're going to notice that's a weakened question. And we're going to find the conclusion, and we want to focus on the conclusion. So this therefore word is a conclusion marker. That means what follows is going to be our conclusion. And when it says the argument, they mean the conclusion. So the conclusion is the decision to keep the Grenville open shows that social concerns sometimes outweigh the desire for higher profits. So social concerns sometimes outweigh the desire for higher profits. We want the opposite of that. So we want to show the opposite. We want to show a financial motive on why they kept it open. So as we go through, we would see that these do not fit that financial motive to keep it open. This one is a perfect fit. Closure of the Grenville refinery would mean compliance at enormous cost. So there we go. Sentence correction. So this is probably the most robotic or formulaic for any coders out there that they might like that on the verbal section. So it's a lot of rules, and I mean, it's a little tricky on how to apply them, but learning grammar rules and which ones are tested and which it focuses on, it'll become like a new language to you. That's a big thing that I talk about on the GMAT is we want to, it's like learning a language. And so the more you practice deliberately, the better you'll recognize things just automatically. And that automatic habitual recognition is going to be what we want to really come in with confidence and be able to crush these questions where you're facing a significant challenge with questions getting harder, the better, as you do well. So let's take a look at this. So the way these work, sentence correction, we have an underline. And these represent, the answers represent 5 different options for the underlined part. So the first one will just be the same thing that's up here. But basically how you want to think of it is you just find 4 errors. So we want to cross off 4. And a key to this process to speed it up is we can compare the answers and eliminate a whole bunch at once. So if we look at the first 3, they all have the word has. Oh, seeing some questions here. All right, after I finish this, we'll answer that. Good question. Okay, so we have has versus have. So this is going to be a subject-verb agreement. He has, they have. Sorry for the poor handwriting there. Wow. All right. So we need to find the subject, which is the noun that for this verb. So we have to go back. They put a lot of words in between it, but what has not significantly reduced the gaps? Well, we go back. This is all like modifying efforts. This is modifying here. So the subject here is efforts. And is it efforts, has, or have? Efforts, have, because it's plural. But then we cross these off. And then we look at the rest of it, have not significantly reduced the gap that exists, have not been significant in a reduction of the gaps existing. Unless there's another error, the shorter one is generally going to be correct. This is much wordy, awkward, terrible. And so that's going to be correct. All right. So the question about the quant formulas, you're not given any formulas. And another note, it was on one of the slides, is you're not even given a calculator. So no calculator. That's important to know. So it's tough. You gotta, it helps to practice your mental math. There's a link on the website, gmatcoach.com/resources for mental math flashcards. For the formulas, it means harder math problems. In some ways, it does mean, I guess it does mean, versus the GRE, for instance, the questions are harder and you also don't have a calculator, but you won't have ridiculous calculations. Like the hardest thing you might have to probably calculate is like, you'll have like 203 and divide by 9. So they're not that crazy. That divides evenly. So mostly the numbers are pretty friendly, but yeah, they're tough. They can be tough. Yeah, and so the formulas, that's what the flashcards are for. So there's also lists of just all the formulas. I much prefer the active learning. So quizzing yourself is going to be much more effective than trying to read them. So just, you go through the flashcards and learn them. Yeah. So there's 2 different types of quant. So we have problem solving. So this is a pretty simple, straightforward one, but you still need to know the rules. So I would have to know how to break this down. And this fraction, it's x minus y over x. So you break it into 2 parts, x over x minus y over x. And then from there, you can get 1 minus y over x. And here we have x over y equals 2/3. So if you flip that upside down, we have y over x equals 3/2. 1 minus 3/2. And it's a little better if you have a bigger piece of paper. You can keep a little more organized. It should be more organized, like this should be below, but you get 1 minus 3/2 minus 1/2. There you go. Now that's more just straight arithmetic. You'll also have a lot of kind of more confusing word problems. Now this one is, once you've practiced enough, you'll recognize immediately this is like a Venn diagram. It's overlapping sets where this is the both in the middle. And if you study the materials or work with the coach, you'll learn strategies like how to organize all this information into kind of a 2-way matrix, and then it will be easy to solve. We probably don't have time to actually solve this one out, but yeah, there's a technique for these overlapping sets, and you'll have the totals here and the totals here, and it just all kind of sums up. And so that's good. And actually, I recommend for that one, the Manhattan GMAT book on word problems is really good for that. So yeah. Data sufficiency. So this is really tricky, and this is a unique problem type that makes the GMAT harder than the GRE. We have to, the biggest mistake people make is not to have a systematic process. So I'll show you here. We want to kind of go through this flow chart here. We'll go back to the problem. But so we have a question, and then we have these clues. So the first step is to address the first clue on its own. Can we answer the question with just this piece of information here? So it gives us the x is 50, so that's this distance here. Can we answer the question, will the first 10 volumes out of 20 fit? Well, we don't know anything about the books themselves, so that's pretty clearly not sufficient. So 1, we put an I next to it for insufficient. 2, this one tells us about 12 of the volumes have an average thickness of 5 centimeters. Well, we clearly don't have any information about the book rack. That's clearly insufficient. Now, if those are both insufficient, we have to see if together they're sufficient. So we've eliminated this answer, and this answer. There's still C or E. They could either be together sufficient or together insufficient. So we do together. And if we look at it, we have some info on the bookshelf, some info about the volumes. But if we think a little more carefully, what we really need to know, it's asking 10 volumes out of 20. And this only tells us about 12. There's an average of 5 for 12 of them. Well, then there's 8 volumes. We have no clue. So there's no way we can answer that question. So we put insufficient. And then that would be E. So that takes a lot of practice, and you're going to want to memorize these. There's a shortcut to that. It's 1 to 10 to memorize it. This is 1 alone, 2 alone, together. E for together, E for each, N for not. All right, so this is a systematic process we just talked about. It's another way to visualize it. They are always in that order, yes, the answer choices. And the statements always look like this, exactly. All right, yeah, so this is just another way of visualizing it. So we have step 1, is statement 1 alone sufficient? Step 2, statement 2 alone sufficient? And then if they're both no, so if we have no and no, then we have to go to step 3, are 1 and 2 together sufficient? And having that system will help a ton. Integrated reasoning, we don't have time to do everything here, but this just gives you a sense of what they visually look like. There's 4 types of questions. They're much more graph and chart related, so it's interpreting data much more. And so we'll have, this is one type of table problem. And there's going to be several for each, several questions. Yeah, so Manhattan GMAT series are very good. I also highly recommend flashcards. Yeah, there'll be links on the site, and I'm going to update soon with more links. There's some on there now, and a few still need some updating. But I'll get more into the resources. That's a great question. Yeah, so about finishing every question. So we go back for a second. You actually can't go back. So that's the thing that's tough with that. You actually can't go back or forward. So that's what's different from other tests is you just get one shot. That's it. Yep. So that's why the pacing is important. The good thing about the structure here, though, is that, like, let's say ideally you're not going to run out of time, but if you do, and so let's say you just have to guess the last 2 or 3. Oh, no problem at all. Small human, I understand. Yeah, if you have to guess at the last 2 or 3 on the quant, it's not the end of the world, because those last adjustments are going to be much smaller. You see, like, it's adjusting the distance down is going to be much smaller than the distance here at the start of the test. So that's works to your advantage. One thing note on that is you do want to make sure to guess. There is a penalty if you do not answer them completely. Plus, why not guess? There's a 1 in 5 chance you'll get it right. So great question. Let's see. Integrated reasoning. So the trick here is for many of the questions, you have to get all 3 parts right. So you have to have a really good attention to detail. Like each of these aren't necessarily so hard on their own, but if you get one wrong, you get all of them correct, all of them wrong. So this test is just brutal in terms of requiring attention to detail. But the bright side, you can look at that attention to detail and actually see it pay off in real life, where you're noticing mistakes you make on your own writing in your emails, business emails, ways you can make things clearer, weaknesses in people's arguments. So if you look at it instead of just a stupid test, if you have that attitude, well, maybe this is actually could apply to some real life, you know, those skills you develop for mental math when you're shopping, it's actually great. You can calculate discounts. All that stuff's great. The essay matters less, but just to give you a sense what it looks like, you have a statement here. There's a conclusion. It's very similar to the critical reasoning. So that's your conclusion. Detail, exactly, yeah. So you have 2 reasons why, and these arguments are generally pretty weak. So what you're going to do is break it down and talk about the assumptions and weaknesses in the argument. So same thing you're going to do on the critical reasoning. So practicing critical reasoning will help for this. And then you just want a simple 5-paragraph structure is what I recommend. You can come in with, you know, more than this, like in terms of a template. Like with my clients, I'll actually give them more of a template. But this is basically what you want. So you have the argument states, you have the 3 weaknesses, and then you conclude. So if you have a good structure, and actually the number of words matters. So if you want to be about 500 words, and there's actually a robot grading it along with a person. So that's kind of interesting. That figures into the fact that it's easy to measure the length, so that's going to count. Still want to check your spelling and grammar and all that, but you don't have to be a poet. You don't have to be perfect in any way. When to take it. So ideally 2+ months is a good idea to be on the safe side, give yourself some peace of mind, because if you're applying to a bunch of schools, which most people do and is generally recommended, there's a lot of work involved with all those essays. You're stressing out. You don't want to be doing both at the same time. So if you can get it done in advance, that's a huge benefit. There's also the option, like if you're just getting out of school and you want to take it when you're more fresh, you know, you've just been taking all these classes, you've been taking tests. Exactly, it expires after 5 years. So you have 5 years to use the score. You know, that's an option to take it more soon after school. Related to that, the average person is about 5 years of work experience for an MBA. So you also want to give yourself time and take the pressure off if you don't hit your goal score. You want to give time for at least 2 attempts, and it could take more. You just have to, I mean, you know, you definitely want to get it done the first time, but allowing for that option is a good idea. It takes some pressure off. And they changed it. It used to be a full month, but yeah, 2 years is probably a good guideline. Yeah. There's like extremely rarely you'll have someone that goes straight in. But I think that's a pretty good guideline. Yeah. And it varies a lot on that. Yeah. Probably, you know, closer to 5, maybe more beneficial, but that can vary quite a bit on the particular situation. So now, yeah, they reduced the time to 16 days. It used to be a month, and it's a $250 fee. Now you can cancel your score, and now you can have it not report at all to the schools. So you can take it 5 times in a year, 8 times in your life. So, you know, if you want to take more shots at it, yeah, $250 every attempt. So there's like at every step of the way, there's going to be some investment involved. Yeah, unfortunately. And yeah, the GMAC, they make money on that. They do make a lot of money on it. All right, so, this is my favorite part. So how to maximize your score. So this is a quote I love. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. Probably one of the best quotes if you can put it into action. Funny thing here, it might not actually be by Aristotle when I Googled it. Oh, well, it's still a great quote. We can break down our habits into training habits, kind of the macro, the big picture things, our study habits, our scheduling, our discipline, all those things that will apply to everything we do. And then, of course, the micro, the GMAT habits. Are we speaking GMAT language? Are we watching out for the traps? Do we think like the test maker and be able to anticipate things and recognize problems and all that? I'll know all the rules, all that stuff. Then there's active training versus passive. So the problem with, I think, big problem with schools and learning is we're mostly in this zone. Lecture, reading, like a lot of that. We need to be spending way more time in the practice and teaching zone up here where there's way more retention. So you asked about books. They're good as a reference, definitely, and looking up things you don't know. But I tend to focus much more on active quizzing, doing problems, reviewing, smart flashcards. And then, of course, if you're working with a tutor, the way I structure it is I'm kind of having you teach me in a way, explaining your logic, and then refining the gaps along the way. Training habits, we have to recognize that it's going to be a sacrifice. There's something has to go if you're going to put the time in to, increase your score dramatically. So it depends on what you're targeting and where your starting point is. Some people come in, so let's say you're a magazine editor, was your job. You might be able to come in and crush that verbal. You might be an engineer and be able to crush that quant. But, for most people, it's going to take a lot of work. Committing to a daily routine is huge. It's like learning a language. So you want to have that daily immersion. Block it off on your calendar and hold that time sacred. So you treat it like an appointment with yourself that can't be taken away. It's so huge. It's hard to do, but you really have to build that moat. And then the attitude I talked before is like, how can I practice this in real life? Thinking about, maybe think about it like a game or a sport, like try and make it fun. Watch yourself improve, celebrate that. Would the bad score be included? Well, you can keep your score and they'll basically be looking at your best score. Yeah, they'll be looking at your best score, but even still, you might some people don't want to show a very poor score. So you can go either way. There's not necessarily a huge advantage in canceling it, but you have your option either way of sending it to schools or not. How long should sessions be? I think, 30 minutes potentially at a time, but you're going to want, so I don't have the graph on here, but people who score high are 600, 700s or over 100 hours of practice. So, and it can be way higher than that. That's an average. So that varies a huge amount. So, you look at that. If you did 15 hours a week for 10 weeks, that's like 2.5 months. That's 150 hours. Now the quality is going to matter a lot too, but it's not. You don't necessarily fix on a number of hours, but that gives you a kind of a sense. At 15 hours a week, you're looking at quite a significant investment. That's like 7.5 hours on weekdays. So if you did 1.5 hour times 5 weekdays, and then that would be another 7.5. So another 3.75 per day on weekends. But you can spread it out how you want. Mornings are generally recommended. You can spread it out however you want, but people who work a hard job, they come home tired at night and they blow it off, and that's not good. Track your training. So getting into that, how do we actually make sure that we're doing it? I highly recommend this app, Habit Bowl. It actually, when I first started using this was one of the bigger things that helped me in all aspects of improving things I wanted to work on in life. So highly recommend that for whatever it is you do. And love Peter Drucker, so great author there. What gets measured gets managed. Applying that is great. Deliberate practice. So this is the idea that it's a specific type of practice where we're purposeful, we're challenging, we're pushing ourselves, we're getting feedback, we're tracking ourselves, and we're removing obstacles. So you can imagine two people spend 100 hours. Well, average person shooting basketball, they're dribbling leisurely, they're not tracking it. This player A, though, he's doing it like a pro. So he has somebody retrieving the shots, removing obstacles, getting way more reps, keeping track, very intense, much better. I mentioned before, defeating distractions is huge. Put that phone away, turn off your notifications, build that moat. And here's a couple tools that can help. There's a whole bunch out there, but blocking distracting websites, basically we can use technology to help us a lot with this. Setting reminders, and just not giving yourself the option to do something, like throw away the cookies in the house. That kind of thing is one of the best ways to help with these habits, because willpower is a scarce resource. It actually is like a muscle. You run out of it. So we want to rely not on willpower as much as possible. There's 3 levels of training. So with the flashcards, we're going to get this mastering the basics, the foundations. Then there's applying that basic knowledge on the questions, where there's all these traps we have to avoid. There's processes that we talked about for the data sufficiency. So applying all those processes. And then the highest level would be just keeping practicing and removing that frequency of error and improving the speed. So it's like a language. Your fluency and accuracy with practice and reviewing errors is going to improve dramatically. But the key is we do have to really learn from our mistakes. So if you're not learning from your mistakes and redoing the mistakes you make, that's not going to, people who do thousands of questions, if you never learn from it, that's not going to pay off. So here's the Brainscape app I recommend. So here's an example of an idiom. Do we use fewer or less than half as many apples? Well, this one's actually wrong in the grocery store. 10 items or less is often there, but you say fewer. And then less than half the amount of trash. So this is screenshots from the Android app. There's also iOS and there's also PC. So this is the front of the card, and then you can either hit spacebar on the PC or tap reveal. Then you get the back of the card. You're going to rate yourself from 1 to 5, and it's going to give you more of the ones you rate low confidence. So if you give it a 1, you'll get that card a lot more. It's way more efficient. What I also recommend is to create your own cards. You need a systematic way to learn from your mistakes. So base that on your mistakes on official problems. This is just showing the effectiveness of Brainscape. I really love it. It double the effectiveness of flashcards. This is based on a Columbia study, Columbia University, and over 4 times books. Another one I recommend, there's links on the site, Magoosh. There's 3 different apps and also on web, math, mental math, and idioms. So a good way to fit this into your life is just getting in, someone asked about how much time should you spend at a time. Well, it can vary. You can have the blocks of time that you have set out at home, but then you can also get a lot of that flashcard time in just throughout the day, taking advantage of downtime. So and it feels really good to make productive use of that. People maybe just space out on public transit or in a Uber rideshare, in line at the store. So that's all great if you can make use of that dead time. This one's nice too if you arrive a bit early. It's a good habit in general, reduce stress, and then you can get a little productive time in advance working on your flashcards. Error logging and analysis. So this is what I do with my clients, and I'll have them fill out the journal, basically, of why, like this is for a verbal sentence correction. Why did I reject the correct option? Why I selected the incorrect option? Then you have to reflect and actually learn from your mistakes. And what's interesting here is there's actually two ways to get the question wrong. Like to get the wrong answer, you would have had to do two things. So you rejected the correct and you selected the incorrect. So it's kind of two mistakes in one, which actually is a good news because you have two ways to catch an error. So you want to review your errors immediately when you make them, and then redo the questions later, maybe a few days or a week or something. Just keep, and if you make a mistake again, you redo it. Also redo ones that you're slow or you guessed. So one option for getting expert feedback, that's one of the other aspects of deliberate practice is feedback. You could hire a GMAT coach. Now, I'm a big believer that you can do it on your own. It's just a matter of how much time it's going to take and how much struggle it's going to be. It certainly always helps to have live expert feedback, that accountability, answering questions, all those things. So I also, I will say that, but you can do it on your own. And the better coach you can be to yourself, like as you're doing your homework and coaching yourself, that actually makes a big impact. So I do like to emphasize, be a coach for yourself. Another way is Manhattan GMAT Navigator is an awesome product. This is $50, but this has 900 solutions to official problems. And so you would enter in the problem here. It tracks everything for you, and you have all the solutions here, right here on the right. There's a free version, but it doesn't have the solutions. Another option that's free that I actually probably, there's plus and minuses to both, but one of the advantages of this one is you actually they get around the copyright law somehow because it's user uploaded. And the question's right here. So this is a screenshot of GMAT Club. It's a little more cluttered, but you have the question right here. You have the timer right here too. So you can see your time, which is great. You can see, how you're doing on pace, and it tells you whether you got it right or wrong when you hit this. So you'll hit the play button. The timer will start. You select an answer, and it tells you whether you're right or not. It also is nice. It gives you stats on how other people did. And then it'll keep track of your practice history. So you can sort this here by wrong answers. And you hit that, you'll get all your wrong answers to the top. You can go back and do them, and it just reduces friction. That's one of these big principles of getting that practice density, getting a lot of practice in, because you're not spending so much time shuffling through a book. So that opportunity cost of different methods is a factor. It's really nice to have all the problems right there. Oh, there was one more note on this slide. You can also sort by kudos. So this is a nice thing. Sort by kudos here. By default, it's by date. Then you'll get the top rated comments on that question. And this is someone who I really like, GMAT Ninja. He's another GMAT tutor, and he has a really good explanation for this particular problem. Oh yeah, so one more thing on GMAT Club is they also have question directories. So there's a link on the site on GMAT Coach resources for this page here, and it has links to all the problems from all the books. So this page is bigger than that. This is 2018, 2017, but the books go back to 2015. And then if you click on like this link, for instance, you would get a site that looks like this, but a lot bigger, and you have links to all the problems. So that's really nice. I highly recommend official practice tests. Now, one of the reasons for that is it's just almost impossible to create exactly realistic practice questions or for the companies that try and do it. They do a great attempt at it, but GMAT, with all the money they have, they spend about $2,000–3,000 estimated per problem to create it. So there's just no way to replicate it. It's it's just much better to have the real thing. So there is an investment involved if you want 6 of them. There's 2 free, and I recommend starting with 1 and just giving it a try, see where your starting point is, get a sense of where you're at. You can go back later. You'll probably get harder questions, and you probably won't remember them. So you could retake it later if you want. Then there's this is $90 for another 4. Yeah, so there's different thoughts on that. I generally say, to get it, particularly when I'm working with someone, to get a program together, maybe try a few practice questions. There's 90 questions on here. Get a sense of what the questions are like, but I like to get a sense of your starting point without a whole lot of training, and just get a feel for it. It's gonna be tough, but just take the plunge, I'd say, and it really can't do any damage. Can't do any damage as long as you know in advance that you probably have a ways to go, a long ways to go, if you're shooting for those higher scores. Yeah, that's a good question. So last thing actually here is minimizing anxiety. So that's a big deal for a lot of people. People maybe do okay on their practice tests. They get in there and they're really stressed. Basically, the number one thing I'd say is deliberate practice makes confident. So if you have your habits down, you know what to do. That's going to be the biggest thing. You've taken these practice tests, you've scored well on them, you've simulated them with real conditions. So if your test at 8, you take it at 8. You take that 8-minute break between sections. You don't take any pauses. The other biggest thing for this is deep belly breathing. Everyone knows it. I don't think that many people do it. Really, really expanding the belly as you do it, not just, not from the chest. And a nice reminder is you have a confirm screen. So yeah, so this pops up when you select an answer. You get a little confirm screen. So that's a good reminder. Okay, did I actually answer the question that was asked? That's one thing to check, is like, did I make a stupid error? Did I rush selecting it? Because you don't want to make those careless errors. Then the second thing is to take that deep breath. So only a couple minutes left for questions, but for slides and links, visit gmatcoach.com/resources, and I'll be adding more resources to that page soon. There's several links there now. And any more questions here? Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate you coming to see this. And yeah, actually, one last thing, of course, let me know if any questions come up. I love being a resource. I love answering questions. You can find me on LinkedIn, find me on my website. Right now, at the moment, and it could get busier, I have an option for a free consultation. So if you want to take advantage, you can do that. Yeah, absolutely. Connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just linkedin.com/in/Ben Resnick. So just my name, Ben Resnick. I'll put that in the chat here. Yeah. So that's that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. This was really enlightening and helpful.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. I'm going to put one last link in the chat here, the website. Were there any other questions, or did we get it? Did we get everything?
Give them a couple seconds to type if they need to.
Great questions, by the way. I appreciate that. That was nice to be more interactive. Oh, awesome. Great to hear, Libby. Thank you.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Ben. Hopefully some students will be in contact with you if they have further questions.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Sarah, for having me.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
You too. Take care. Bye.